ADHD Rewired, episode 448. This is the podcast for those of us with really good intentions and a slightly wandering attention. I'm Eric Tivers. I'm a licensed clinical social worker by training and a coach by design. I'm your host, and I have ADHD. ADHD Rewired is more than just a podcast. We are a community. We are wired for connection, and you are not alone. Go to adhddiversified.ca to learn how you can join us in our free and secret Facebook group. Get additional resources for every episode, including links to any resources we mention on today's show. You can support us on Patreon, sign up for our email newsletter. You can request podcast postcards to distribute to your clients and support groups. Learn all about our award-winning coaching and accountability groups. You can co-work with us in our Adult Study Hall virtual membership community. You can do all of these things by going to our website at adhddiversified.ca. We know that starting is the hardest part, so let's get started. Welcome back to another episode of ADHD Rewired. Today's guest is Laura Key. Laura is the longtime editor and content creator, hosts the ADHD Aha podcast, and is the editorial director at Understood, a resource for millions of people with learning and thinking differences like ADHD and dyslexia. Laura co-leads the Understood podcast network and spearheaded the creation of the Medium publication 4by. She has 2 kids who keep her busy when she's not working and sometimes when she is working. Laura, welcome to ADHD Rewired.
Thanks for having me, Eric.
So it's you were just telling me right before I hit record that you are much more comfortable when you're on the other side of the mic being the interviewer.
Oh, yeah. I much prefer to talk with people about their experiences. And it might be because I have a background in journalism. I went to journalism school and also just, I'm not always super comfortable talking about myself. So we'll see where this goes, Eric. Good luck to you.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you. Okay. So let's first talk about your ADHD story.
Let's do it.
When did you learn that you had ADHD?
So I got diagnosed with ADHD when I was 30. I'm 40 now, so that was 10 years ago. But my ADHD diagnosis came about 2 years after a different diagnosis that I received, which was for anxiety disorder. It was a really interesting journey for me. I had started to go to therapy in my mid-20s, and my therapist was kind of hinting at the fact that, I think that we may want to consider getting you on some anti-anxiety medication. And once I, opened up to that, because I definitely was not at that time open to taking medication, it felt like cheating to me. I'm sure a lot of people feel that way. When I finally opened up to taking the medication, Eric, it was fantastic because I was able to just know how I was feeling. It's not that it made me feel happy or down. It was like I would call it like a metronome for my emotions. I knew when I was feeling down. I knew when I was feeling up, and I just had more awareness. And then with that awareness came this feeling that, something else is off. What's going on? Oh, I can't focus. Oh, I'm having trouble, keeping up with deadlines at work. And little by little, I started talking with my therapist and also my psychiatrist about it. And my psychiatrist one day, brilliant man, he just asked me one very, very specific question that kind of blew my mind. He goes, Laura, when you're sitting in a coffee shop trying to write and edit your work, if someone makes a noise across the room that kind of bothers you, do you get like irrationally bothered and unable to get back to your work? And I was like, how the hell do you know that? Because it seems so specific. And yeah, he's like, let's get you an ADHD evaluation. And we moved on from there.
Is that part of what you were sharing with him, that you were having a hard time focusing on your work?
Yeah, it was that. And also talking about emotional regulation, which had gotten easier with the anti-anxiety medication. But there was still something off, as I mentioned. I kind of felt like I couldn't control my emotions the way that I would have liked to. I felt like I would kind of fly off the handle. It's probably not a great term to use, but I would do that, and I just, something had to give, right? I needed some support.
So 2 years after you were diagnosed with anxiety and being treated for anxiety, you got the ADHD diagnosis. And did you start medication treatment for ADHD right after the diagnosis?
I avoided it for a while for the same reason. I was like, I can't be on two medications. How about, what a cheater I would be, right? Like, how dare I let myself have tools to help me,
You just need to try
function.
harder, right?
Yeah, exactly. I could just work harder. I'm just being lazy. I'll just exercise more, and I'll try better diet, and I'll sleep more. And all of those things are great, but it wasn't enough. And eventually we tried non-stimulant medication, and I wanted to start like that. And then eventually moved into taking a stimulant medication at a low dose. And it was just night and day. The fact, like the ability
How would you
that
describe that first time on a stimulant medication for you?
It's so interesting because somebody asked me once, what does it feel like to take ADHD medication? And my response was, it doesn't feel like anything. I can feel it when I'm not taking it. So the feeling was the difference, right? The feeling that it's not like I have superpowers. I don't want people to think that like you take ADHD medication and you can conquer the world. It's just like, oh, I know what I need to do during the next hour.
I take my ADHD meds and I can actually wash the dish after I use it.
Yeah, exactly. That's really it. It was the case for me for both medications. Like the feeling that I didn't really feel anything. I didn't feel high. I didn't feel low. I just felt like regulated. That to me told me that this was the right medication at the right dose.
And you said it helped you feel regulated. Was it also helping you with your emotional regulation?
Yeah, it definitely was. It's not that I felt calmer. It's just that I was able to take a beat. I could pump the brakes. And it's interesting, Eric, because I'm just realizing this now. I think I've kind of always been like, I've been like very well emotionally regulated in really hard situations, like situations that I'm prepared for my whole life, medication or not. Just like, okay, this is going to be a really emotional moment. There's an illness or there's a hard thing going on in a relationship. But it was just the things that I couldn't anticipate that, again, kind of would like set me off. And it's those things that I didn't have a moment to pause and think about something before reacting. And that's where the ADHD medication came in and helped.
How much of that do you think is around sort of that like mental flexibility that so many people with ADHD can struggle with, is that ability to sort of shift our perspective or shift what was about to happen?
I don't know. I've never thought about it that way. I guess I always thought of myself as a flexible person. I'm struggling with this one, Eric. Sorry.
That's okay.
Could you phrase the question in a different way?
Because I guess what I was picking up on is when you were saying that there is like when you were taking the medication, it's there's the medication wearing off right now. We should probably tell listeners that right before we started recording, we're both like, I think our meds are actually wearing off right now, so this should be interesting. And I'm planning on leaving all of this in, by the way, because this is fine. ADHD. Right. And
if everybody could see me right now, they would see that I have to do interviews, whether I'm the interviewee or the interviewer, standing up, and I'm just like swaying my body. I literally think better on my feet. So,
and that's great. That's good. You're doing things that you've learned that work for you. Mm-hmm. So we were talking about emotional self-regulation and mental flexibility as sort of a part of that. And you were saying that you thought of yourself as someone who is flexible, but then when you were saying that it was flexibility when it was something that is it like that you can control, or it was hard to be flexible, like, is it actually then flexibility?
No, the word control, I think, is really important there. Perfectionism is a big part of my story as well. I think my symptoms went unnoticed for so long because I pushed myself so hard and I was such a perfectionist, and I would stay up all night doing my homework rather than risk in quotes getting a B+ or an A-. And it was like to the point of almost burning out, right? So that inability to control perception of oneself, that inability to control those kinds of things that are in fact out of your control, kind of drive me nuts, for lack of a better term.
When you said perfectionism, was that something that you felt was part of kind of how you did school, and like, so way before your ADHD diagnosis?
Yeah. And way before even being conscious of ADHD symptoms, for sure.
It's interesting because I know for me, my perfectionism, I know, was born during that first semester of college when I was diagnosed with ADHD. So I was diagnosed my sophomore year after I almost failed out. And once I started taking medication, and I was like, oh, I can learn. I can do this stuff, right? And then for the first time in my life, I got good grades, and then I was expecting myself to do it again. And that's where the perfectionism was born.
Right.
And that
you work. Yeah.
it is, perfectionism is not like when I hear people say that like perfectionism as a strength trait, I was like, it is one of the most joy-robbing forms of neurosis that there is. So like I've been working on my own perfectionism for years and years and years. And I'll get into these spaces where I'm like, oh, that is behind me. And then I'm working on another project. And I'm like, I've been working on the layout of this one slide for the last 2 hours. Help, please.
Yeah, I totally get it. It's like you create these more difficult expectations for yourself as you go. And like this version of yourself becomes more and more attainable. And it's interesting. I was interviewing someone on for my show the other day, and he kept referring to himself as an underachiever. And then in the next breath, he would say, but I always want to do more. I always want to do better. And I pointed out to him, I'm like, those two statements seem really at odds. Like, don't you? And I really related to that moment. And he was like, oh yeah, you're right. I'm like, I don't think underachievers are sitting around thinking about how they can be better all the time.
They call themselves lazy. Like laziness is not thinking about all the things you need to do and not doing it. Exactly. Right? That's executive dysfunction.
Exactly. And I don't honestly, Eric, know how I really made it through high school without crashing and burning. I mean, I was like basketball practice and games every day, volleyball practice, games, AP classes, probably student council and all that other BS and whatever.
Sounds like you had a lot of structure though.
I had a lot of structure, but like, I feel like I barely slept. And I was just like spinning. And then it just, once I got to that mid-20s age and was like in first job, post-grad school, I was like, it's just too much.
So when you think about your sort of self-identity as someone who has both ADHD and anxiety, do you think about those separately, or do you think about those as kind of an interwoven thing that affects you the way it does?
Oh, such a good question. I grapple with this all the time. They're just so intertangled. I mean, the comorbidity, as you know, is so high. And for me in particular, like that entanglement is part of my ADHD story, because it was this chicken and egg. Like, am I anxious because I can't focus, or can I not focus because I'm anxious? What's happening here? And it's still really hard for me to tell the difference.
Have there been any things that you have been able to identify to sort of distinguish between?
Oh, let me think. To distinguish between ADHD and anxiety and the symptoms that come with it.
Yeah, and I guess, and more specifically too, of like what you do about that.
Yeah. I think as my awareness of my ADHD traits and symptoms and difficulties grows, it's easier for me. I think it's easier for me to spot the ADHD stuff, quote unquote, than the anxiety stuff. I'll notice when, like right now I'm starting to like drift off, right? And I'm like, that's definitely my ADHD thing. The anxiety stuff, it kind of feels like a little mini motor all the time, like this kind of rumination thing. I don't know. What do you think? Like, can you help me understand this? Because I've been struggling with this for a long time. Like, what's the difference?
I have issues around anxiety that sort of wax and wane throughout the year. And I have my entire life. And there's definitely times where the anxiety is sort of external pressure based. And there's definitely times where I don't know there's no actual pressure, but I am feeling profoundly anxious right now, like that just uneasy feeling in your gut. And so a couple things that I've identified for myself anyways is if I am not exercising or not exercising enough, one of the things I actually discovered just in the last like year was like, I cannot have a second cup of anything caffeinated if I did not exercise. Like if I exercise, I can be okay with that because it sort of like burns it for me. But if I had a second cup of coffee, or I had I'm like, I want to move for a chai tea today after, on the way to work, like that, I will be sitting at my desk just feeling like a nervous wreck. Right. And so I did discover that. I did definitely have that, seasonal affective disorder, and so anxiety and depression kind of go hand in hand with that.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, it's gone through different periods. I remember when I was in college, after I was diagnosed with ADHD and was taking medication, I was also getting a lot of anxiety, and so I was prescribed some anxiety medication. And I like just very vividly remember like, oh, this totally helps the anxiety. Because now I just don't really give a shit about anything. So right, it was too much. It made me chill too much, right? And so I was like,
yeah, you could feel it, right?
Yes. I'm like, oh, I am relaxed as hell right now, right? Which is, I kind of felt high, right? Which is, I don't think is the point of anxiety medication. It's just supposed to take the edge off. And now I take my ADHD meds. I take the meds are wearing off and I can't think of the med. My Deus. And then I take Wellbutrin on that for a couple of years. And I have a PRN, sort of an as needed, a medication that I always forget the name of. I'm looking in my drawer. Lorazepam, which I will take for sleep every once in a while, or if I'm having really high anxiety. I don't even think I've taken that thing in a couple months. So yeah, but that's, it's part of this ADHD picture. Like, I have to use the expression like ADHD often comes with friends, right?
Oh, and yes. I've heard you say that. Yeah, I love that.
Right. And it's like, these aren't friends that we necessarily want to have, but they're around. And so we have to certainly learn how to manage those. So what I want to actually do right now is take a really quick break and we will come right back. And I want to hear some of the stories that you've heard when you've been interviewing the guests on your podcast that had that ADHD aha. So we will be right back. Support for ADHD Rewired comes from ARC. ARC is ADHD Rewired Coaching. Learn more at coachingrewired.com. Every season, our members learn and experiment with different tools and methods that work with their ADHD. They become more aware of where they're really spending their time. They learn how to create actionable to-do lists that reflect their intentions and more. Our fall season of coaching and accountability groups are now full, which means we are opening up our interest list for our winter season. So go to coachingrewired.com to get your name added to our interest list. Because there, you'll be able to get notified when our first registration event for our next season of coaching groups will be. If there's one promise we make, it's that you will still have ADHD by the end of our 10-week intensive coaching program. But the support doesn't end after those 10 weeks. Our members have continued their personal growth journeys with other members who have already gone through our coaching groups in our alumni community, because maintenance is hard. And sometimes we need others who truly understand us to remind us that we can do hard things. Whether it's revisiting our to-do lists, remembering our successes, or remembering the strategies we've learned, we don't have to do any of that alone. Find out more and get your name added to our winter interest list to join us for our winter season of coaching and accountability groups starting in January of 2023 by going to coachingrewired.com. Once you've added your name, we'll let you know when our kickoff registration event will be. Come grow with us and kick off your new year and make it your best year yet. That's coachingrewired.com. Support for ADHD Rewired comes from our patrons over at adhdrewired.com/Patreon. If you love what you hear on this podcast every week and you find value in this show, consider becoming a patron, where you can also find some extra perks. We have perks of $5, $10, and $25 a month, all of which include ad-free episodes of this show. At the highest level, at $25 a month, you could join me for our monthly coaching call. Usually our monthly coaching calls are every fourth Tuesday of the month at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern. But this month only, in September, we are moving it to Thursday, September 29th, at the same time at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 Eastern. Then, after this month, we'll go back to our regular monthly call time, which means our October monthly coaching call will be on Tuesday, October 25th. Maybe you're thinking ahead about ADHD Awareness Month for October. A great way to do that is to become a patron. Consider becoming a patron to support our work if you learn something new every week. Thank you to all of our patrons who give over at adhdrewired.com/Patreon. We so genuinely appreciate all of your support. Become a patron today. Go to adhdrewired.com/Patreon. And thanks. All right, we are back with Laura Key from the ADHD Aha podcast. She's also the editorial director of Understood podcast network there. So before we get into the stories that you've heard on your podcast, what made you think about doing podcasting and then doing a whole podcast network?
I got tricked into it, and I'm just kidding.
There's always a grain of truth in those jokes. Huh?
Well, we'll get there. So we had launched a podcast a few years ago at Understood called In It, which it continues to be a podcast for parents of kids who learn and think differently. So it's a parenting show, and it's seen a lot of success. It's a wonderful show. Recommend folks, especially parents, kids with ADHD, who maybe your listeners, check it out. But, following that, we realized there are so many other kind of stages in people's journeys or different types of people we can talk to through podcasts. We provide so much information on our website, but it's really hard to bring emotion through written content and sometimes even through pre-recorded video content, right? There's nothing like sharing personal stories to help people change their attitudes about things. At least that's how I feel. And we put together a pitch and we said, we want to launch a whole network and we want to see where it goes. And one of those shows in our network is ADHD Aha, which I host. The idea wasn't originally for me to host. It was just, I was part of the brainstorming process. And we have some amazing folks on our team who, I think what happened, Eric, was I was telling them about my own aha moment. And so an aha moment, as we define it, is that moment when it finally clicks that you have ADHD, or sometimes it comes post-diagnosis, like you realize, oh, ADHD is really real. Like you maybe were like kind of sweeping it under the rug a little bit. Now you're, I'm going to pay attention to this. And my aha moment fell into that latter category when I was a few years after my diagnosis, so in my early 30s. I went back to my parents' house in Ohio and I used to journal all the time. And I found my boxes of journals and I was like, oh, this will be a fun little trip down memory lane, or a terrifying one. And I opened up these journals from as early as when I was 13. And it was almost creepy, Eric. I had scribbled all over the pages the word focus and bubble letters and little letters and big, like all over, page after page. So I was trying to focus on my thoughts and write because I always wanted to be a writer. And I couldn't focus, and I was writing the word focus. I had no awareness of ADHD symptoms. But the discovery of those journals post-diagnosis was like, oh shit, this has been affecting me my whole life. And I just haven't really paid attention to it. So in sharing that story with some team members, I think it was somebody else who came up with the term ADHD Aha. And that's what we do. We explore aha moments with folks.
So what have been some of the most impactful ahas that you've heard as a host?
They're all so impactful in different ways, as you know. I mean, this is what you do as well. And I'm sure each guest resonates with you on a different level. But, well, it's interesting. We approach each episode through the lens of a symptom because we talk with all different kinds of people. We talk with parents, we talk with individuals, men, women, people from different parts of the country, people with different backgrounds. But the thing that I feel like really draws listeners in is the connection to the symptom. Like if you see an episode called like ADHD and boredom and you're like, oh, I have ADHD and I'm really bored all the time. I don't care if this person doesn't sound like me or isn't from where I'm from. I'm going to find something useful in this story. And so like, that's kind of the entry point to all the episodes. And I mean, there was one on recently with a woman named Kai. Kai is a comedian. And when I pre-interviewed her, she was like, I just always thought I just had a bad personality. And I'm talking with her. I'm like, you're hilarious. What are you talking about? We get into the show and she's just cracking me up the whole time. And we played an impromptu game show where I went through all these different scenarios where like, if you're talking with basically an ADHD symptom and how that could make you a bad friend. It was kind of like reverse psychology. It was really bad actually in hindsight, but she was able to like take these stories about like procrastinating and cutting people off and interrupting and like through that kind of cathartic laughter about symptoms and how they can make people maybe feel certain things about you. We came to this like really beautiful moment of like, your personality is amazing. You don't have a bad personality. You're struggling with executive function. And I'm not an expert. Like I don't diagnose anybody, but just people just come to it on their own a lot of times through the show, which has been really cool.
I always love those moments when I'm interviewing someone and the response to a question is, I never thought about it that way before. Or like, I love that when you can see the wheels sort of spinning and just giving that new perspective or a different perspective that just helps clarify. I think this week we came out with the 440th episode. And so sometimes when I'm doing the
Congratulations.
Thank you. Sometimes when I'm doing pre-interviews, when I talk to people, they'll be like, oh, I'm sure you've already had stuff on this in the podcast. I'm like, yes, and nobody has told it quite the way you are. Because, we can have the same topic discussed hundreds of times, but it's a little bit of a different flavor each time.
Yeah.
And one flavor might not resonate as much as another flavor. And so I think that even if we are repeating some of the same ideas, everyone has their own story. And I think that's one of the most powerful things about sort of long form content that we can do in podcasting is, it's through story that we see ourselves in others. So it's, we're not looking at a symptom checklist. We are, it's even in the meta conversation, the losing track of where we were in the conversation. And people, I get a lot of people who tell me like they love that I leave that stuff in because they can hear themselves in it, right? And it's like,
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, yeah, you're so right. Especially like the way that we approach it through like a symptom first thing. It sounds like it could get kind of repetitive, but it's those unique flavors of people's stories. Like so many folks on my show talk about impulsivity and their impulsiveness. And one of the young people I interviewed on the show, I think his name is Chris. Yeah, Chris. And he was so soft-spoken. And he just got to this place where he was like, I seem calm on the outside, but on the inside, I feel like I'm a volcano. And it was just this really powerful moment because he just seemed really shy. And then after he said that, he just opened up and he shared how he's impulsive and how other people don't always notice it. Yeah, we always cry a little bit on the show, and we try to keep it fun too.
So you can do both. We had someone today in one of my coaching groups who is he's an actor, and he was saying, I'm very outgoing and kind of bubbly, and then I had this realization, I actually don't like people. Well, I mean, it's nice. Like we put on these masks, and sometimes we realize like, oh, this is a mask we're putting on. Like sometimes we put the mask on so much and so often that it kind of becomes who we are until we kind of have that moment where, wait a minute, this actually isn't.
Totally. I one of the episodes I'm thinking about right now is his name was Kevin. Oh yeah, amazing Kevin. And he wasn't told about. He was diagnosed as a kid and he didn't find out that he had it until he was in his early 20s when he was at Disneyland or Disney World with his mom and his nephew. And his nephew had been diagnosed with ADHD and was running around and was being kind of that classic presentation, quote unquote, classic presentation of hyperactivity. His mom was like, oh, you have that too. You have ADHD too. And I was like, what are you talking about? It's like, I just never told you. I didn't think you needed to know.
That's heartbreaking. Oh my gosh.
But he just like, he is so lighthearted and amazing. And he kind of laughed about it. And as the conversation went on, he's like, yeah, but I don't think it really affects me. And then eventually he was like, oh yeah, you're right. It really affects me. It's not like I was trying to convince him that things were hard. It's just, it was clear to me through the course of the conversation. And that mask.
Did you just give him that kind of sort of silence and space to just say that without a reframe? Because sometimes it's the silence that helps someone actually realize that what they just said, they're full of it.
Yeah. I maybe I did. Sometimes I'm overly chatty. I don't always have a lot of great silences, but yeah.
So let me ask you this. How has doing this work and talking to other people with ADHD and working for Understood, how has that impacted your own ADHD?
Oh, I mean, first of all, I'm part of a built-in community at my job, number one, at understood.org. And there's so many folks who work there who have ADHD and or learning disabilities. And if they don't, I mean, we're all immersed in all of this constant feedback from either the experts who we work with, from whom we get to learn all this amazing stuff. But most importantly, perhaps, is like the community feedback that we get. And that's what I get also from the show. And it just makes me feel, if I'm really honest, I don't think I never really intended or wanted to be a representative of ADHD. It wasn't like in the plans for me. And so I was hesitant to even host the show. And I maybe even a little bit embarrassed, like I'm going to be sharing a lot of stuff about myself, right? And then little by little, the emails start coming in. And I see you smiling, so I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. And I'm just like, oh, this actually made a difference. This helped people to hear the story. And I know that sounds cheesy, but it really, I mean, it's probably the reason that I keep doing it.
It's the reason I keep doing it. Been, coming up on almost 8 years of doing this podcast. I remember very, very early on, because I had a clinical therapy practice, and even on my website, it was very it was more of a get to read between the lines on some of the stuff that I had to be able to gather that I had ADHD. And so when I did the podcast, I was like, oh man, I'm like really putting myself out there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I remember getting an email from someone, maybe episode 7, 8, something like that. And the email, it was just a couple of sentences, and one of the sentences was, "Thank you so much for putting out this email. It takes a lot of balls to put out what you're doing." And I was
Yeah.
like, oh no, what did I put out? What did I say? But then, I got more and more of these kinds of emails. And then I know I've shared this on the podcast before, but it was episode 47 of my podcast. So it was
wow, good memory, by the way.
Well, it's probably, because I still get emails about this particular episode. So
Okay.
I was like so deep in sort of perfectionism land I was gearing up. I think it's like for my second or third launch for my coaching groups. And I was just like completely determined we're going to fill these groups up. And so I'm studying all this marketing stuff to do the whole like launch sequence and everything, which it's a ton of work. I was also giving a presentation to a school district on that day. And I even knew at the time, I'm like, this is going to conflict with this launch. But they're paying me for this. So I'm going to go do this talk. So I was so focused on like, all right, like I haven't missed a week yet. I'm episode 46. I'm almost at episode 50. I can't miss this week. And I'm going into, I think it was at the time I released episodes on Monday, and my editor needed the episodes by Friday morning. And I'm going Thursday night, and I'm like, I don't have an episode. So I grabbed my recorder on my way to the talk and just start talking into the recorder while driving to the talk.
Oh my gosh.
I was like, that week I was up until like 2 a.m. every night. Like my brain was not in the best spots. Like I don't think I could like finish a thought. And I was like, I don't think I should release this. This sounds really unprofessional. Like my ADHD is raging on this episode. Right? And I had it queued up, and I was like, went back onto the media host, and I was like almost unpublished it. Like, I'm like, I don't think I should release this. And then I did, I released it. And to this day, it is still probably I get more emails and contacts from people thanking me for releasing that episode. I refer to it sometimes as an auditory fMRI of ADHD. Because I had someone tell me that they thanked me for releasing it because they were beginning to wonder if I actually had ADHD, which, by the way, brought me to tears, that email.
Oh,
right? Because
wow.
It's like we sometimes, when we take a step back and sort of see how we're dealing, and when we're realize, oh, we're actually not screwing everything up, right?
Yeah.
It's
And
like,
that substance and relatability can be so much more important than the polish, right?
Yes. Yeah. And that's been such a helpful thing as for my own ADHD. It was really, from really that episode on was a huge turning point in my own perfectionism. I was like, oh, people just want me to be real. And like, it's okay that like, if I'm sometimes a little off my game or I'm a little tangential, or if I, occasionally interrupt, or we have a topic on a podcast that we never really talk about that topic. Because people are like, yeah, this is relatable. Like, these are my people, right? And I think I think community is so important. But, kind of going back to the question, I'm just watching my own ADHD right now in my monologue.
I love it. I'm embracing it. You're among friends.
And it's just like not having to mask helps all of my ADHD symptoms, right? When I don't have to masquerade as normal, when I don't have to put on this show of I got all my shit together, because I don't, right? And I'm just showing up as the best self that I can, right? And knowing that best self is going to change day to day, right? It's something about it takes that pressure off of like, I hope I'm not found out, because I'm already found out. So it's nothing I'm trying to hide.
Yeah,
right?
I totally relate. I mean, this show has been like a release valve for me. I mean, it adds a certain amount of stress, like with like scheduling and whatnot, but like the act of doing it, except for the first few episodes, and I was like about to pee my pants.
Well, those first few were supposed to be awful, right? I mean,
yeah, they turned out well because we have an amazing producer and but yeah, I mean, but now I really, really look forward to going into an interview. And one of my favorite things to say to people before we go in, I'm just like, you don't have to prepare anything. Just show up. Yeah, I got you. Yeah. We're going to have fun, which is kind of what you do.
Yeah, exactly. Every once in a while, I think I was telling you this during the pre-interview, every once in a while, I'll get people who will email me like, can you send me the questions? I'm like, that's cute.
Wait, but Eric, I think I might have done that too because I was so nervous.
Actually, as I was setting that up, that actually was crossing my mind.
No, you should. But look, that's my perfectionism anxiety. Like I would never, it's because me, I'm not worried about you. I'm worried about how I'd be perceived, right? But like for my own show, I'd be like, well, you don't need the questions.
I'm so glad you brought that up because I was actually really surprised that you sent me an email asking me for questions.
I didn't know what you wanted to say. I don't know. I just want to put, my best foot forward, Eric, and trying to represent my brand well, not my personal brand, my organization well,
Absolutely.
I'm glad that's out in the open though, because that needed to be stated. That was like, see, you were asking before, what's anxiety versus ADHD? That was my anxiety. Right. So there, I spotted one. We finally came back to it.
That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is actually a really good point for us to take one more quick break. When we come back, I want to talk a little bit about some of your other roles as one being a parent. We will be right back. Support for ADHD reWired comes from Adult Study Hall at adhddiversified.ca, the virtual co-working community and body doubling community where people with ADHD are working together to get things done. From our weekly guided sessions, also known as Adult Study Hall Plus or ASH Plus, to our 24/7 drop-in room, there are plenty of ways that you can utilize the power of real-time accountability to get your to-dos from do to done. It's only $19.99 a month and it is free for the first week to try. Go to adultstudyhall.com to learn more about our ASH Plus sessions and everything else that we are offering in Adult Study Hall. Come work with us at adultstudyhall.com. If you enjoyed this podcast and want to stay up to date with our show notes and weekly episodes, then make sure you subscribe to ADHD Rewired by either going to adhddiversified.com/podcast or by hitting the subscribe or follow button in your favorite podcast player. And if you love this show, don't forget to leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast player if that app allows. If you are one of those probably many, many people who keep thinking and meaning to leave a review, would you please do it? It's really helpful for us. Then be sure to check out our other shows on the ADHD Rewired Podcast Network by going to adhdrewired.com/podcast network. We have Hacking Your ADHD with Will Curb, ADHD Essentials with Brendan Mahan, and ADHD Diversified with MJ Siemens. And coming soon, coaches Kristen Martz and Coach Kat Hoyer, they are both going to be starting a podcast in the months to come. We will have more information about that as it develops. You can also join me and the rest of the ADHD Rewired team for our monthly live Q&A every second Tuesday of the month at 10:30 a.m. Pacific, 1:30 p.m. Eastern. The best way to join us is by going to adhdrewired.com/events to register for our monthly live Q&A so you can interact with us and have a chance to ask your questions live. Find this podcast and all of our shows by going to adhdrewired.com and clicking on the podcast tab at the top of the page. And if you want to join our monthly Q&As, click on the events tab at the top of the page so you can join us every month. That's adhdrewired.com. And thanks for listening. And we are back. I just wanted to share with listeners during the break, we were grabbing a sip of water and Laura told me that her daughter has the same water bottle, and I told her that I had lost this water bottle for about a week, and turned out it was actually on my desk for the entire week. I just, Do you have counter blindness? I have what I call it counter blindness, where I know I'm looking for the thing, and I'm looking right at it, but my brain does not register that I'm looking at it.
I can't, Eric. Yes, Eric, I do. My daughter, my 7-year-old daughter points out to me constantly that she's like, Mom, you lose your phone every day. She's like, it's right there. I'm like, thank you. But I will run up and down the stairs in my house and I'll get my heart rate going. It's like my best exercise is looking for my phone. It's just sitting right there. Do you have a smartwatch
or Tile?
I do. I'm just not wearing it right now.
At least once a day, I tell my Apple Watch, or I'm asking Apple Watch, where's my phone? At least once a day.
I have an Android watch, so I don't know if it'll do that.
The Tile?
I don't know what are these words you're saying to me? I just don't know.
Tile. I have it in my wallet, right? Like,
All right, writing it down.
At least once a week, I'll get a text message about 30 seconds after I leave my house, letting me know that I left my wallet at home.
Oh dear. Oh dear. Yeah. This is the reason why we have an electronic lock on the door, though. So assuming that we don't leave our phone at home, we can unlock the door from our phones if we need to.
Just hopefully the internet doesn't go down.
Oh my gosh, I can't.
I think we found an anxiety trigger. They've lost the internet. Okay, so how does your ADHD show up as a parent?
Oh, I overly anticipate all of the steps needed to quote unquote complete the day, because I'm always like, I can get so hyper focused on something that I can be forgetful about my parenting duties. So it's interesting, like, and this maybe some anxiety and perfectionism rolled up in it as well. But all the parenting websites will say, if you're having trouble getting out the door in the morning, prep everything the night before and this and that. I do that and then some. I'm like prepping things to the point, because I'm so afraid I'll forget something that my child needs, prepping to the point that sometimes I'm not as present with them as I would like to be. So I'm so worried about being disorganized for them that I think I might be perceived as just, I'm always there and we have a lot of fun, but I'm just like, yeah, but before we sit down, I got to do this one thing. So I'm working on that. I am. And yeah, it's actually, that was kind of hard for me to admit, but you should keep that in the show.
Parenting is, for me, one of the harder roles in terms of ADHD. So I think in some ways it plays well because I can be very playful and kind of spontaneous and kind of go with the flow. But on the other hand, where it, for me, because my son, who's been on the podcast before, who is is highly gifted with ADHD and autism, like his verbal just rate is so fast, and like his ideas, he keeps moving out, and I need a little bit of time to process what he's saying, and so it's like I get overwhelmed, right? And he's a major homebody, and I'm also like kind of a homebody, but I also want to get him out to do more things. And so if I have a hard time transitioning anyways, and he's resistant to going out to do stuff, like, it's just like, oh, okay, well, we can stay in. Right. And stuff like his birthday is next weekend. I'm actually, so I'm going to see Fish, the band, on his birthday. I'm going to be out of town for the weekend.
Is he going with you?
No. We did talk about it. But I still haven't planned anything for his birthday. I'm whispering, even though he's not even anywhere in the building. I don't know why. It's because I feel like bad that I haven't done anything yet.
I hear you, Eric, but you're going to figure it out. Let me tell you a little story, if that's all right.
Please.
I think this might be an example of like an ADHD related strength potentially.
Okay.
When we were like at the very beginning of the pandemic, everything, like schools weren't even open with masks and whatnot. My daughter was about to turn 5 and we had planned her birthday party for her. And obviously we had to cancel everything. And she was just so down. And I was feeling the same way. I'm like, what am I going to do? What am I going to do for her? I have no idea. And I was like, Cecilia, put on your Frozen dress or put on all the regalia, and let's just take a walk. Let's just take a walk around. And I texted as many neighbors whose numbers I had. And I was like, we're going around the block for my daughter's birthday. Could you just like poke your head out and wave to us and like cheer for us as we go? Aww. And I brought pots and pans and I was just banging on them saying, it's her birthday. It's her birthday.
Yeah,
and
I love that.
That was like, to her, that was like the biggest party she could ever had. She felt like a princess walking around the block and getting cheered for. And that was like an on the fly thing. I wish that my ADHD would surface more in ways like that, but that is something that I was proud of and really happy to have done for her. And she seemed really happy.
So last February, my girlfriend and I, we went to Mexico for a week to see Fish. And on the last day when we're ready to go back to the airport, the people from the hotel, they try to sell you on these timeshares and all that. So earlier that day, I was, sitting by the pool thinking like, I want to bring Gibson. Like, I think he would really like this kind of thing. And I'm like, and I just really want to make sure I'm doing more vacation because it's something that I've been kind of neglecting for the last decade. And so
Yeah.
we're heading out, and this person from the hotel is trying to sell me on this thing, and I'm just like, I'm not enjoying. And he said something that I'm like, wait, what? So he said he can come back for 5 days for $500, and then he actually take that $500 and use it towards resort credit. And I'm like, okay, so what's the catch? He's like, well, there's a 2-hour presentation for a timeshare that you would need to. It's like 2 hours. I'm like, I'm stubborn. I can plug my ears, and so I did. It wasn't a completely impulsive purchase because I had been thinking about wanting to take him there, and I wanted to do more vacations, and I was like, oh, well, this seems to cross that off. So that is as far as I've taken it. I have his birth certificate. I need to get him a passport, which requires planning because my ex and I need to go do that together because both of our signatures need to be on there. And I'm just like, oh my God, because all he wants is to go on a plane. He's like, you told me that my 10th birthday I would go on a plane. I'm like, I know I did, but I didn't know we were going to have a global pandemic. Right?
Oh, yeah.
So I've been starting to sort of tease a little bit, there might be something that we might need to go somewhere where we need to get on an airplane. So he's excited about that. But outside of that, I still have so much planning to do around that. And so that's the kind of stuff where my ADHD and parenting becomes challenging, is just the logistics and the planning and the not thinking on the weekend, what do I want to do this weekend?
Yeah. I actually really struggle with those weekend moments, though. It really bothers. I need the structure. Yeah, I think I'm a better mom during the weekdays, which maybe sounds counterintuitive, but I'm the best at bedtime. I'm so good at it in terms of just quality time and efficiency. Eric, because it's the structure, right? Breakfast time, hanging out, do a good night walk. We're doing all these things. The weekend comes around and I'm just I get really anxious, and the lack of structure kind of bothers me. And then I get anxious about the fact that I'm anxious because I'm just be a free spirit and just be cool with it.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Are there any interviews that you're excited about coming up?
I'm excited about the one I actually referenced earlier, the interview I referenced earlier about this guy, Kenny. He's a creative director. He was diagnosed in the 80s with ADHD, and he's kind of been telling himself that he is an underachiever most of his life, and yet at the same time is always wanting to do more and do better. And we got to talk a little bit about punk rock music and how it's great for people with ADHD, the short songs and whatnot. And so that was fun as well.
Oh, that's so interesting.
How do you deal with Fish? The songs are so long.
And that's why I said it's so interesting, because I love the 20 plus minute jams that are because it's not repetitive. It's it keeps going somewhere else, right? And it's when you have some of their longer jams that have there was, what song was it? I was listening to, it was on Sirius XM, and sometimes they'll interview different band members. I think it was one of the band members saying that one of their songs was 33 different parts to this one song. And it's just wow. It's, as a musician, I just fascinated by the musicianship of it.
That makes a lot of sense, very jazz-like, and that way it kind of goes where it goes.
And experimental and very very playful, and that's what I love. So they'll do all kinds of really weird, goofy stuff, which I just love.
So I think my musical tastes surface in a different, vis-a-vis my ADHD, they surface in a different way. I'm I want that structured song, right? It. And I remember when I went to go see Sonic Youth when I was in my early 20s, and they were doing all this experimental kind of plucking on the guitars, and it was bow, and then bow, and I'm come on, let's move it along. Come on. Why is the song taking? I know what song this is. I want to hear it. This is my favorite song, but you're making it take too long.
Or Fish will have certain songs when they do live, where there's this big climax, and then this crescendo, and then goes into the next movement, and they'll sometimes just exaggerate that pause in between the climax and the next movement, where it's almost okay, boys, come on, let's get on with the show now. I get it, it's you're hyping it all up, but that was about 15 seconds too long of a pause. No,
trying to get out and beat the traffic. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I'm oh my, I remember that as a kid, when I would go to sporting events with my family, and they would always want to leave early. And I was why?
This is the best part.
Right. It doesn't make sense. Beat the traffic. Who cares? Who cares about the traffic?
I know. But those parents, like, they're just trying to get some structure.
All right. Well, let's end it here. The podcast is ADHD Aha. The website understood.org. Are there any other places where people can learn about what you do and what you do at understood.org?
I would just say we have a lot of different properties that all with, a slightly different way of helping people who learn and think differently and supporting them. We have an app now for parents called Wonder. We've got our Medium publication 4by, which is all personal stories by people with differences like ADHD and dyslexia. Of course, our website and all of our podcasts. So I guess the only other thing I'd give a shout out to is that we just launched a new podcast last week called Understood Explains. And the first season is about the special education evaluation process. The idea is we always hear from parents, I just wish I had somebody to talk me through every step of the process. So we're doing that in podcast form.
That's amazing.
So
my background is as a school social worker. I used to get hired by families to do that. And it's such an important piece. And I always tell parents, like, this is a thing that you never knew you needed to become an expert on, but it's something you need to become an expert on. Because it's about resources. And if you don't know what you're entitled to and what you need to ask for, you're not going to get it.
Yeah. And that's why we wanted to kind of democratize that. Let's put it out in podcast form. Let's get everybody access to it. It's great. Yeah.
Laura, thank you so much for spending this Friday afternoon with us here and for putting out great content into that podcast space. And I am hopefully looking forward to coming on your show and sharing my ADHD.
I would love that. We'll get it on the calendar, Eric. Thank you. And see, I didn't need pre-written questions after all. It went fine, right?
Yeah, it went fine, even though our meds are wearing off. Like, it's all good.
It's really been a pleasure. Thank you. And thanks for everything you do, Eric.
Thank you. This is Eric Tivers. Thank you for listening and congratulations for making it to the end. ADHD reWired is more than just a podcast. We are a community focused on learning, growing, and connection. The website is adhddiversified.ca. You can find time-stamped summaries and additional resources for each episode. Apply to join our free and secret Facebook community. Learn more about our award-winning intensive online video-based coaching and accountability groups. Join the Adult Study Hall virtual co-working membership community. Find all the other podcasts on the ADHD reWired podcast network. Sign up for my email newsletter to get exclusive content that you won't hear anywhere else. And use the search tool to find episodes on specific topics. You can do all of this at adhddiversified.ca. While you're there, click on the Patreon button. If you are a regular listener, consider making a monthly contribution by becoming a patron. If you are able to financially support my work, it would mean a lot. This show is free to you, the listener, but it's not free to produce. Plus, patrons get cool perks like ad-free episodes and access to recordings of coaching calls, and $25 a month patrons can join me once a month for a group coaching call. You can follow me on Twitter at Eric Tivers. You can like our Facebook page at facebook.com/ADHD reWired. If you're a coach, therapist, or related professional, connect with me on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/Eric Tivers. Subscribe to ADHD reWired on YouTube to see selective interviews and other videos I've made. Podcasts change lives. You can make a difference in someone's life by spreading the word about this podcast. Mention it in your online communities on Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, or wherever you hang out online. And be sure to share it with your friends, family, your therapists, your coaches, doctors, siblings, parents. And if you, your coach, therapist, doctor, or ADHD support group leader would like a pack of podcast postcards to hand out, you can request those at the website, adhddiversified.ca. If you are a member of CHAD, ADDA, or any other ADHD support group, please be sure to tell them about this show and all the shows on the ADHD reWired podcast network. You can even show them how to download it on their phone. And if you really loved this particular episode, please hit share on your podcast player. I'm only one person, and I do count on you to help spread this message. One of the biggest things that you can do to support this podcast and help other people discover it is to leave an honest rating and review on Apple Podcasts or any other app that supports reviews. And don't forget to hit subscribe so new episodes are automatically pushed to your favorite podcast app. Looking for more ways to listen and learn? Get a free audiobook and a 30-day free trial at Audible by going to audibletrial.com/ADHD rewired. Here is my list of must-listen-to audiobooks updated July 2021. Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg. Attached by Amir Levin and Rachel Heller. Atomic Habits by James Clear. The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni. Crucial Conversations by Carrie Patterson. The Coaching Habit by Michael Stainer. The Body Keeps Score by Bessel van der Kolk. Rest by Alex Sujong Kim Pang. The 5-Second Rule by Mel Robbins. Make It Stick. The Science of Successful Learning by Peter Brown. The Productivity Project by Chris Bailey. Meditation for Fidgety Skeptics by Dan Harris. Change Your Questions, Change Your Life by Marilee G. Adams. I always recommend to my coaches and admin that they read that book. The One Thing by Gary Keller, a required reading for all of our coaching group members. Procrastinate on Purpose by Rory Baden. The 4 Tendencies by Gretchen Rubin. The Art of Asking by Amanda Palmer. And if you're looking for something a little bit more magical, I have fallen in love with the Harry Potter series, and the narrator, Jim Dale, is amazing. And of course, if you haven't yet boarded the Brene Brown bus, all of her stuff is great, starting with Gifts of Imperfection, Daring Greatly, Rising Strong, and The Power of Vulnerability. And if you're an entrepreneur or leader, be sure to check out her book, Dare to Lead. Do you have something that you would like to share? Click on the podcast tab at ADHD Rewired. Click the button to be a guest at the top of the page and schedule a 15-minute interview. This is Eric Tivers, reminding you to keep learning, growing, and connecting. Self-care is not selfish. No matter what you get done or don't get done, you are still enough. And no matter how hard it feels, we can do hard things. And we don't need to do them in the hardest way possible. Thanks for listening. I'll catch you next week.